I have a master's degree in clinical psychology. During my 7 years in college, I was taught to classify, diagnose, and treat mental and behavioral disorders. But I never ran across a course or a subject called Prevent Mental Illness or Learn How to Be Happy. There are obviously lots of self-help books, sometimes written by best-selling authors, that cover the topic of happiness, but none at the college level when I was studying. Things may have changed since I was in school, but I'd rather not age myself too much. So when we talk about things like wellness, quality of life, satisfaction, subjective well-being, even health, we are talking about more or less quantifiable and measurable constructs. But what about happiness? Can it be measured? Or is it too intangible, too abstract, too complex? Well, I don't have all the answers you might be looking for, but for the next 20 minutes, I will ask some thought-provoking questions. And in doing this, I will lay out my presentation with three main ideas. First, happiness is more than the sum of its parts, and consciousness plays a key role in it. Second, we are not genetically doomed to illness, and in the very same way, we are not doomed to unhappiness. And third, creating happiness in our lives is a challenge that actually begins at birth. So let's begin. The origins of the behaviorist paradigm are based on the idea that the mind is a black box, a complex device of which we know the inputs and the outputs, but not the inner workings. Despite these paradigms' focus on observable events, many behaviorists still recognize the mediator effect of the brain between stimuli and behavior. For some psychologists, the purist behaviorist paradigm remains viable due to the fact that their experience has shown them reliable regularities between environment and behavior. But can we really explain everything relating to the complexity of humanity based on observable relationships between stimuli and behavior? And if we add the idea of human consciousness to this equation, things get even more complicated. And what if we go further and include happiness as a result of how our consciousness interprets life events? Well, despite significant developments in medicine and neurology and the introduction of functional brain imaging technology in these fields, human consciousness is still like a black or at least gray box. According to classic physics and its determinist conceptualization of the world, everything you and I do is completely determined by mechanical actions. So every conscious experience, and that includes feelings, thoughts, ideas, intentions, is interpreted as A, a byproduct of the activity of your brain that has no reciprocal effect on it, or B, the very same thing as brain activity, and it can be described in terms of the material structure of the brain. However, quantum physics has made interesting contributions to the way the world is conceived and understood. According to this more recent theory, not all aspects of consciousness are necessarily causal consequences of brain mechanism. And an interesting concept regarding this is self-directed neuroplasticity, that alludes to the idea that focused training and effort can systematically alter cerebral function. And I'll quote an article written by Swartz and his colleagues in 2005. Conscious effort itself can justifiably within science be taken to be a primary variable whose complete causal origins may be untraceable in principle. This idea reminds me of some spiritual currents that conceive the real you as the observer, of what the material you is doing. Is this observer the same as what we refer to as consciousness? And this also may be related to the concept of mindfulness, the ability to be fully present, aware of where we are and what we are doing, and not overly reactive to what's going on around us. So, isn't being mindful in a certain way like acting as the observer of our own reality, as opposed to a conditioned automaton who simply reacts to a stimuli? And isn't this kind of metacognitive awareness a new entity that can be better understood under the laws of quantum physics? Well, there's some food for thought there. But now let's go over some things that science has actually proven on the subjects of well-being and happiness. For example, that positive emotions, positive social connections, and physical health influence one another. That being happily married is generally connected to better psychological and physical health. That a heartfelt smile is associated with numerous benefits, whether given or received. And this was the conclusion of a 2019 article published in Postgraduate Medical Journal. Also, exercise and physical activity have beneficial effects on several physical and mental health outcomes. It's been proven that both isolation and loneliness impair quality of life and well-being. And a 2013 article proved that rather than improving well-being, Facebook may undermine it. Also, mindfulness brings about various positive psychological effects, including increased subjective well-being, reduced psychological symptoms and emotional reactivity, and improved behavioral regulation. Empirical studies have also identified significant links between religion and spirituality and health. So the question is this: will you be happier if you exercise, have healthy social interactions, religious or spiritual beliefs, a happy marriage, and stay away from Facebook? Well, your chances might be better in these cases, but there's no guarantee. On the other side, will you be less happy if you have a chronic disease, a grumpy boss, or a few friends? Probably, but not even these circumstances would guarantee unhappiness. You maybe wonder, why is that? Well, this is because things that happen to us only account for a relatively small percentage of our happiness. There's an interesting process in this equation called hedonic adaptation. Hedonic adaptation refers to the observed tendency of humans to quickly return to a relatively stable level of happiness despite significant positive or negative life events. Have you ever thought about a person living with a chronic illness and wonder how they deal with it day after day? Probably by shifting the initial perception of a positive or negative stimulus into neutral. Well, it doesn't mean that this hypothetical person wouldn't be happier if they didn't suffer from the illness. But it does suggest that we all have a quote-unquote happiness thermostat. Some researchers think that this thermostat is determined by genetics and early life experiences, and that we generally return to a default temperature of happiness. The good news is that we can change that default thermostat setting. It may not be easy, but it's possible. If we work on creating pleasant emotions instead of waiting for an event to trigger one, we will have more control of our happiness and will enjoy the health benefits that positive emotions have on our health. Why? Because our brain, as the physical organ, cannot differentiate between an emotion caused by an event or an emotion that we train ourselves to feel. Everything I'm talking about is not new. But in my years of practice, I've come to realize that despite the age of these ideas, people are not highly familiar with them. They don't care, or they simply don't know how to apply them. So, to summarize my first point, if you want to be happy, you can't blame other people, institutions, situations, politicians, family members for your unhappiness. What others do is a reflection of their feelings, their thoughts, their expectations, and so forth. If you take their actions personally, they then become your problem. But if you learn to become the observer, as opposed to one who reacts, you're in better control of your own well-being. And if you're waiting to fall in love, to get the right job, or live in paradise to start being happy, you clearly are not in control of your own happiness. Now, if you're thinking to yourself, well, Sarah is saying that I am in control of my own happiness, but she's also saying that part of my happiness is determined by genetics or upbringing. So I may still be doomed to depression and dissatisfaction. Well, hold that thought. And here is my second area of focus in this discussion. We are not genetically doomed to illness, and in the same fashion, we are not doomed to unhappiness. Pioneer discoveries in the study of the human genome have shed some light on the dated nature versus nurture debate. Actually, the 2009 Nobel Prize in Medicine was given to 3 scientists for the discovery of how chromosomes are protected by the telomeres and the enzyme telomerase. The revolutionary implications of this discovery and the clues it may bring to the mystery of aging are only a part of its contribution to the study of well-being. So let's analyze this in more detail. According to Dr. Cruz of Harvard Medical School, there are approximately 100,000 diseases known to mankind at the moment. There are about 6,000 known genetic disorders that are fatal or cause severe problems for humans. So I'm not a mathematician, but this means that only 6% of all diseases known to men are 100% determined by our genes. So our life habits, our thoughts, our environment, and other epigenetic factors have more relevance in the remaining 94% of diseases. In fact, healthy lifestyles have been shown to delay the shortening of telomeres and in some cases may actually help lengthen them, which is reflected in slower biological aging. And some of those healthy habits relate to perceived stress, temperament, dietary biomarkers, nutritional intake, sleep patterns, exercise, and many others. Furthermore, it's believed that most cancers result from an accumulation of genetic changes that happen through the lifetime of an individual. But those genetic changes or DNA damage may be influenced by environmental factors. For example, when I go to the doctor, I'm always asked if my parents or anyone in my family suffer from things like diabetes, heart disease, high blood pressure, or cancer. Oh, sadly, my father suffers from each of these ailments. But 3 of my grandparents live long into their 90s. Many doctors and nurses don't ask me about my diet, stress level, frequency of exercise, or whether or not I practice, for example, intermittent fasting. So this creates a dilemma for me. Do I tell medical staff about my father's health and get labeled? Or do I just lie given the fact that I'm a very healthy person that doesn't share any of his habits? If we are talking about true well-being, a change in the medical paradigm is necessary. So if we are not doomed to a life of illness by our genetic configuration, why would we assume that we are doomed to unhappiness, when actually a robust body of research shows that we are not doomed by our genetic profile? On the contrary, epigenetic factors on life habits can control the manifestation of our genes, And in the same fashion, we are also not doomed to a life of unhappiness if our expectations are not met. In this complex set of interconnected processes, I want to highlight the extreme importance that a functional childhood has on our future predisposition for happiness. And that leads us to the third and final point. Creating happiness in our lives is a challenge that actually begins at birth. To change the world, we must first change the ways babies are being born. These are the words of Michel Odent, a renowned obstetrician who is the founder of the Primal Health Research Center in London. Research done by Odent and others shows that developing the ability to love and to experience happiness may be connected with birth and early childhood. Actually, there is a short but critical period just after birth known as calm alert. This is a unique moment for the interaction with the mother that leaves a permanent mark on the life and development of the baby. And when birth is undisturbed, our birthing hormones can catalyze profound neurological changes. Oxytocin is one of the key hormones in this process. Oxytocin has been called the hormone of love and also the hormone of altruism. And the highest peak of oxytocin in a woman's lifetime is right after her baby is born. She can maximize the hormone's potential by placing the baby skin to skin while undisturbed during that time. Oxytocin has direct effects on the growth of the brain, especially the neocortex of the newborn, and malfunctions within the oxytocin system have been implicated in conditions like schizophrenia, autism, cardiovascular disease, and drug dependency. In fact, psychologist Adrienne Raine showed that babies who endure birth complications and were also rejected by their mothers were more likely than other babies to become violent offenders as young adults. Attachment has also been shown to be fundamentally responsible for the future physical, emotional, and intellectual health of the newborn. Several studies have found that more than half of all doctors, nurses, and midwives in the US and Canada attending births had witnessed the forcible performance of a procedure against a woman's will. And 2/3 of them admitted to having seen providers routinely performing procedures without informed consent. These procedures include C-sections, episiotomies, and the use of forceps. So I'm not going to go into the iatrogenic harm these sometimes unnecessary procedures may have on mothers and babies. But the point is that these interventions disrupt the natural process of birth and might have consequences in our capacity to love, feel love, and be happy. Early experiences also impact the future outcome of children through biological embedding. This is the process where experiences produce lasting changes in the function of a biological system with consequences for development, behavior, and health. So early life social experiences like early caregiving, trauma, maternal mental health, for example, are known to contribute to individual differences in susceptibility and resilience for a range of physical and mental health outcomes. In closing, happiness is your responsibility, and you can absolutely have it. It may seem at times like it's not possible, but understanding what happiness really is and also the many dynamics that affect its attainability might be the key to figuring out how you can have it. And if you think you had a bad childhood, consider this quote: "It's never too late to have a happy childhood, but the second try, it's up to you." Thank you for listening.